Hello and welcome back to Styling the Centuries with your host, Connie Lou.
Well, hello there. We have a brief change of background today, as today is a purely educational video and you can expect almost no fun to be had.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Just kidding, but I'm also kind of not, because today's video is going to be purely educational. So, hello everybody, my name is Connie, and today, in today's 1920s video, we are going to be looking at how the impact of the First World War changed women's fashions. Today's video was actually requested by the lovely Emma Poppleton, who asked to have a video to have a look at this subject, and that is everything, so let's go! So this video is going to be broken down into two main parts. Initially we're going to look at the fashions and clothing that women wore during World War I, and then after that we're going to look at the 1920s fashion and how the war influenced it. So in pre-war times, Paris had already established itself as the centre of fashion in Europe. I mean, not much has changed there. This was led by Paul Poiret. In 1911, Paul Poiret had designed the harem pant, or jupe culotte, which I kind of personally like to think is an early prototype or blueprint of the infamous gap-year trousers. These harem pants were loose-fitting and thought to be based off of the popular opera at the time, inspired by the ballet russe, the Scheherazade. I'm going to just put that on the screen because I have no idea how to pronounce it. So although these trousers were super scandalous at the time and only really worn by aristocrats or actresses, the masculinization of clothing was then perpetuated throughout the war years. So originally France was the centre of chic fashion. However, during World War I, France and America were actually cut off and they had really kind of severed their ties in communication. And so Paris was kind of left behind and New York actually rose up as the new answer to Parisian chic. But one of the trends that America had nabbed from France was the idea of the fashion show, which was completely new at the time. So following Paul Poiret's 1911 travelling fashion show, America then during the war took on the fashion show as raising funds for kind of aiding the war and sending money perhaps to organisations like the Red Cross, which would help with the war effort. Significantly, Edna Woolman Chase, who was the director and editor of American Vogue in these years, organised fashion shows in New York which showcased designers' work. And today we have Anna Wintour and the Met Gala. Just as charitable, I'm sure. So upon the outbreak of World War I in 1914, women, as I had said in my introductory video on 1920s fashion, were thrust into paid labour, occupying not European countries but the workforce. See what I did there? Women worked anywhere from farms, as working as nurses, or volunteering in charities to aid the war effort. So as a result, women were more often wearing uniforms of work, or at least more practical clothing. Jewellery was kind of seen as frivolous and worn less often, although it was really acceptable to wear necklaces that were given to you by your sweetheart. Or a strange trend that actually caught on was wearing necklaces that were made out of shells or war ammunition. In addition, the colour of clothing got duller because there wasn't enough money to make new dyes, and also hemlines rose at this time. So at this point, hemlines were rising for two reasons. Firstly, there was a fabric ration, and so women were buying fabric with the little money that they did have and having to push it further and make more use of it, so the hemlines got shorter as they had less fabric to actually make the clothes with. And secondly, hemlines rose more towards the calf, not the knee, however, that came later in the 1920s, but towards the calf, because this was considered the height of modern dressing. In 1915, the war crinoline look became really fashionable, and this was a very gathered skirt that was very full and it came down to the calf area, and it was constructed using a crinoline, which was a kind of structured petticoat that went under the skirt to give it that full look. But this fashion wasn't really accepted by the general public. Firstly, because the skirt was so full it actually evaded war rations on fabric, but also there was a second reason in that the tops that you had to wear with it were significantly less frilly than the Edwardian tops that had come before. Newspapers and journalists spread the kind of horrible idea that women were disappointing soldiers who were on leave and who had come home to a significantly less frilly and feminine look in clothing that they had when they had left. In 1916, though, the following year, the war crinoline look had significantly lost popularity as women were becoming more sensible and abiding by fabric rations. So in line with this more uniformed military look, Burberry actually came out with their very first trench coat at this time.
You mean the Burberry trench, with its double-breasted closure button-through welt pockets, the buttons themselves made from buffalo horn with the all-important checkered lining?
Yes. Anyway, Burberry kind of catered for what we would now call today sportswear, and one of their most famous items of clothing that they made was kind of this first sort of ski jacket, because sports and skiing were becoming really popular at this time for kind of the more wealthier members of society, and Burberry made really super good trench coats and outerwear that would protect against the elements. This popularity in sportswear actually then later inspired Coco Chanel in using a very fine knit jersey in sportswear that would be used for normal women's clothing and provided an ease of movement that was never seen before. Practicality also translated itself to everyday life and the harsh reality of air raids. The first full bodysuit was created at this time. It was a kind of onesie and women would wear it to air raids, and it would come in blue, white, mauve and pink. It was actually called a slumber suit and was made to prevent any kind of shocking sights when you came down into the air raid, as clothing at this time was kind of a grasping onto civilization and the last thing that made people still like they had some autonomy in their lives. So at the end of the war years, the trend for more practical clothing really made women think about what they were actually wearing and how their clothes that they were wearing enabled them to do more practical tasks during this time. Women also realised that their clothing could kind of reflect a political opinion, as the demands of women's suffrage were becoming even stronger at this time, and women realised the power that they had had during the war years. The skewing of traditional gender roles as women were working in the workforce kind of also gave women that taste for independence, which was really signature of the 1920s. But it wasn't all idealistic. Many women had been left at home with children to care for whose husbands had died in the war, and for them getting a job wasn't a way to make their own money that they could spend on frivolous clothing, but actually a means to survival. When 1918 came to an end, European countries had not only been kind of demolished by the effects of war, but also there was the Spanish influenza that you also had to think about. So the women that emerged at this time could either be downtrodden with worries, or she could kind of embrace this new modern life, show a little bit more leg than was perhaps respectful, and spent her evenings in speakeasies. The new look of the 1920s was very practical and in today's terms would probably be considered androgynous. There was this bobbed hair look which women were cutting their hair into, despite being advised against to do so by their elders. Women wore almost shapeless, drop-waisted dresses with corsets that would squash down any curves that they did have. But makeup was also becoming really popular in this time with the invention of Max Factor and Maybelline. In previous decades, it was seen that if you painted your face by wearing makeup, then you were either an actress or a prostitute. But in the 1920s, wearing makeup was considered like a professional thing that you could do to wear to work and give you more of like an independent and this new woman look. The flourishing of female designers in Paris and New York gave rise to the idea that clothing was no longer being designed by men to make women look more desirable, but in fact was being designed by women for women and their practical needs in their post-war lives. And that's actually the end of the video for today. I really hope that you enjoyed watching, and if you did, please give me a like and subscribe. It would really help me out a lot. Also, if you want to keep up to date with what I'm doing every day, you can go and follow my Instagram, which is all to do again with the 1920s fashion and costume history. The name will be on the screen. I really enjoyed my time speaking with you today, and if you have any other suggestions for videos that you would like me to do with the 1920s, please could you leave them in the comment. And until next time, au revoir.